Thanks everyone, great to be here. My name is Alison Rosewarne. I'm the Executive Manager of Architecture and Tech Learning and Development at REA Group. So over the years, I have made a few decisions, from choosing frameworks to choosing clouds, from what to name a thing to how to build a thing, and then how we measure all of the things that we build. So this is kind of the credibility slide, and I'm here today to tell you every decision you've ever made has been wrong. So I'll just let you sit with that for a bit. What's your initial reaction? Is it a feeling of anger? What is she talking about? Who is this person? Maybe you're feeling afraid, found out, like, how did she know? I will remind you, we have a code of conduct. Please throw nothing at me. I can fix this slide. Okay, every decision that I've ever made has been wrong. This is heaps better. I'm sure you're feeling very relieved. It's not you, it's me, it's fine. You're probably also wondering why I'm up here talking to you about this. So I'm gonna fix this a little bit more, right? And a little bit more. So I think this makes sense. So building on what Sonia said this morning, I think we know a lot about decision making, right? Decision making is the job of architecture. There are lots and lots of decisions to be made in any kind of successful or unsuccessful project. It's not always easy making decisions, and getting it wrong can be quite costly. There are also architectural decisions being made at all levels, which is a really great thing, right? We're not receiving proclamations from the ivory tower. Every developer is involved in making these decisions, and sometimes people don't even realise they're making an architecturally significant decision, like, yellow, let's try this thing. And a lot of the advice out there is really just, look, just take it from me, I know what I'm talking about, or the always helpful, it depends. So the question is, how do you make no regrets architectural decisions? I'm going to try and offer a few stories from my perspective. So we'll start in August of 2014. This is what the desktop homepage of realestate.com.au looked like. So probably familiar to many of you, it's a property advertising portal in Australia. The homepage has got a number of different tabs. We've got different site sections. If you scroll down, you can see some news and content articles to help you on your way. And the architecture looked like this. So we had a vendor, they were doing our content delivery, the traffic management component of it, and we had two S3 buckets. We had the main one, and then we had a backup one in case the other one wasn't available. So to get the content into the buckets, because this was a purely static site, we had developers writing code, committed it into source control, had a build task, published it out, everything was continuously deployed, kind of happy days. All of that dynamic content I mentioned, not really dynamic. There was a story every week, developer updating a bit of copy, and then off that would go. So after a while, we thought that's not very optimal. Let's fix that up. Added in another build task to pull down some content from our editorial team, putting it in the CMS, put it into Git. Again, the build flows through to production. So the question is this good architecture? I reckon you've probably got some concerns, right? So I'll tell you a bit more of the story. So this is a little bit about the project and a little bit about the team. So this was a temporary project. We thought once we'd built it, we were going to be rebuilding it in about 6 months. We just wanted to take this first step. I think you know how that panned out. It was also a really small team. So I was tech lead within the team, we had a system engineer, we had a couple of devs and a product manager. We had a few other roles that sort of came and went. So we were onboarding people, offboarding people, that sort of thing. But the core team was quite small, cross-functional though, which is great. It was actually our first foray into the cloud for something this high traffic. So we'd put images in the cloud, we'd put lots of peripheral things in the cloud, but the main stuff ran in the data center. And our expectations of availability, very high. Also, as we were building out this website and A/B testing and looking at different options, the marketing team came up with this amazing new campaign with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm assuming it wasn't cheap. And they decided that we would launch our homepage when they launched the marketing campaign with all these TV spots, and they had a dedicated date. I don't even think it was on a weekday. So a lot of this context really informed the decisions that we made. We also asked ourselves about those architectural characteristics, right? The non-functionals, you've heard them referred to as the illities. So what did we value? Like I mentioned, this is the homepage of realestate.com.au. Millions of people come to this page. It's like the launch point to get anywhere. So things like scalability and availability, absolutely top of the list. Really, no downtime is acceptable. So this is a multi-region setup, lots of caching, very available. Usability was another really big concern for us. So we wanted to make sure that the site was accessible. We wanted to make sure that they could get to their destination. Information architecture was important. Design was important. It wasn't just about, how we built the thing. Then there were some things that we didn't worry about so much. So our temporary 6-month thing didn't really need to be all that maintainable because we knew the team, they were all familiar with the code base, they could make changes pretty quickly. That's why we made the decisions around the content. And then from a confidentiality perspective, this is a public website. We weren't keeping any secrets from anyone. We didn't have to worry really about security at all, beyond the basics. So when we were making decisions, we needed to make sure that all of these non-functionals were addressed. And this was mentioned this morning. A lot of these non-functionals, they'll look really familiar to you. They're often called the illities because most of them end in illities, not all. And they're more formally described as architecture characteristics. In this great book, Mark Richards and Neil Ford say the architecture characteristics, they define the success criteria of a system. And so you want to be solving for the architectural characteristics of your specific situation. You don't want to make something highly available that only 3 people use, but equally, you don't want to cut corners when you've got millions of people coming. So my first lesson is to really know your context and the architecture characteristics or illities. Make sure that you're considering these and solving for these deliberately with every decision. So we can fast forward now until 2021. Once again, I'm replatforming the homepage of realestate.com.au. I swear I do other work sometimes. This time around, what we wanted to do was create a replatformed experience across mobile and across web at the same time to really drive design uplift, information architecture, and most importantly, personalization. So this time around, we'd actually invested in the meantime in lots of sort of platform products and whatnot. So we decided to just re-platform and then build from that point. So very quickly, we built out the web experience, which was responsive this time. So we were able to collapse down the mobile desktop experiences together. The mobile iOS and Android experiences, they were built on top of this micro front-end platform that we had in-house. We still had our old friend, the content delivery network and traffic management in the mix. And this time, kind of the big unlock, moving from a completely static website to something powered by a backend, was we had some APIs, right? We had the ability to make decisions server-side. And we'd sort of settled on what we call an experience layer architecture, very similar to the backend for front-end patterns. So you've got this layer, composes domain services, and is really responsible for making sure there's a great consumer or customer experience so that the products relate to that journey. And I think I've got one more box. Yes, we felt like we might need to build a new XR. So clearly this is a better architecture, right? Like it has way more boxes. So go a little bit deeper on some of these decisions. So there are some decisions that were really, really quick to make. So TypeScript, Kotlin, Swift, really no-brainers, right? They're the languages that you use when you're building out front-end experiences. I mentioned that we had this kind of micro front-end architecture. We built some platform products, made sense to use those. React was very foundational to the web micro front-end framework, which is the blue shell. We call it Argonaut. And then on the mobile side, we had a nice pink shell, which we called Nautilus. So all of these decisions were kind of using industry standard tech. We were using that EXA kind of layered architecture that I mentioned. It was already working well at REA, and there really weren't any compelling reasons to go out and try and do something different. So we considered these to be sensible defaults. ThoughtWorks defines sensible defaults. You might know these as default settings, as a set of initial assumptions that we know to be effective and useful. And what we've done is we've taken these sensible defaults and kind of codified these. So we've got an internal tech radar. We've done the build your own tech radar thing. You can just go there, look at TypeScript, in adopt, great, move on with your life. Patterns we commonly use, they're written up in a handbook with the rationale, some kind of reference implementations to go look at. And then we've built out a brand of platform products that are the building blocks for our teams to use. So these decisions, very quick to make. Next up, there are some slightly tougher decisions. So we're talking about using less proven technology. I was really keen to have declarative UI in place across web and mobile. The snag at the time was that Jetpack Compose was still in beta, and as we were going through the process, our team's really uncertain about jumping in on a technology that was still a beta release. We didn't have that much in-house experience either with using that within our mobile community. We hoped the skills would be transferable from web, had a cross-functional team, again, this time web and native together with backend, but we just weren't sure. And then that kind of icon in the middle, that's our design system. So we'd invested heaps in a design system for web, it was amazing. Mobile was still coming, and it was on the roadmap for this other team, but we thought, do we wait? We're going to build all these components, we're going to have to change later once the beautiful design system comes along, or should we actually do that? Should we sort of pull that work forward? And that impacted other teams, right? And then when it came to the experience layer that I mentioned, we knew we needed to build a new experience API, but that's not a kind of trivial undertaking. Again, you've got all that traffic to consider. And we had some existing APIs, so maybe could we pull out that dirty word of a tactical solution and live with that for a while? So to make these decisions, we ran what we call an interested parties review. So this is really, really similar to an architecture decision record. It's this process we follow. So again, taking from what Michael Nygaard said, each record describes a set of forces, so that context, and it's a single decision in response to those forces. So we made sure that we really captured the context. With the interested parties, that considers the people who are impacted. They're the consult group, also the subject matter experts. Everything's all written down. It's in Git. We have sort of some ceremonies around it. So we used this framework to help make these decisions. Finally, there are some really big decisions to be made. I'll just call out this one in particular. So I mentioned that we wanted to personalise that experience, and we felt like we needed to invest in some decisioning tech. So decisioning tech is this great term from the MarTech world, where you have a piece of technology that takes context, it's usually site behaviour, something like that, and then it makes recommendations for you. Might be, you should show these products, or this is a good next best action, or use this copy, something like that. We knew that if we injected this into our architecture, it would have to be highly available, because every request would need to hit this service. We also thought that if we picked the wrong technology, it might have a huge implication for our personalisation strategy, because that was really still forming. It could be the great unlock, right? Provide all this amazing capability, but it could really limit it. Product might come along and say, oh, actually, we meant that we want to do this. We want to try this sort of experiment. And, we've invested in a vendor and spent all this money. And so that's where the buy versus build equation came into it as well. Should we go out? Should we do a due diligence process, RFP, that whole fun thing, and bring someone in, or try and build something ourselves? So to make this decision, we used what we call an axiom. So these are for the bigger decisions. And this was introduced by Dan Aragao, my predecessor, and he describes it as a process to tackle decisions that impact REA as a whole, or are really hard to be reverted. So for these ones, it's not enough to go through the whole process. Like, it is a scaled version of that process. You really need to prove out the decision in the real world context, which means you have to build it into production, right? So we need to build one or multiple experiments to prove out that it works. And then once a particular experiment has succeeded, you need to unwind the failed experiments. You can't just leave those in production. And then you need a migration path as well. In this instance, we're doing something new. We don't need to worry about a migration path, but if we are replacing something that exists, it's not enough to just say, this is the new greatness. You need to plan for the full migration. So this takes more time, but the investment is definitely worth it. So just to kind of recap on how we made all these decisions, the real key here is to make sure that the process that you follow matches the decision that you're making. So hopefully you can make as many decisions as possible with sensible defaults. You don't even notice that they're decisions, right? There's no deliberation required. They work really well in your organization. They've been validated. Then when you get to decisions that have a smaller impact, maybe they're just within your team, that's where we refer to these as lightweight ADRs. So it's got all those characteristics of ADRs. The value here is the consultation, the documentation. They're equally quite fast. It's always fast to do things within a team, which is where the autonomous team is great. If you then go up a level where you need to work across multiple teams, maybe you're establishing a contract, maybe they're building out a service you're going to use, that's where the IPRs come in. This is actually where we started with our decision-making frameworks. We added the other ones later. And it takes a little bit more time. And then there's this really kind of long duration set of decisions, and you hope the volume of these is really, really small. And that's where the axioms come in. And if you can read the kind of axis on the bottom, that x-axis, it's talking about like high practice maturity to lower practice maturity. And so where you're embarking on an axiom, it's because you haven't done something before in your organization, or it's, you're heading into the unknown. But the goal is for the things that you do all the time, right, the bread and butter that the majority of your teams are working on, you get those sensible defaults in place because that'll unlock capacity. And if you're wasting a lot of time on those, re-prosecuting those low-level decisions, you get decision fatigue. It's really exhausting. So my next recommendation on how to make no-regrets architectural decisions is to make sure that the duration and really particularly like the formality of the process is appropriate for the decision. You don't need to consult with 14 executives if you're choosing what to name your variable, but you might need to if you're migrating to a new cloud. So make sure that the investment is appropriate. Definitely look into sensible defaults. Once you get to a certain scale, they'll save you time. And if there's one takeaway from today, embrace ADRs. So with many of these decisions, there's ultimately this point of regret, right? Someone comes along and they look at that decision, they say, like, that wasn't the greatest decision, depending on how polite they are, that was garbage. And like, we'd done our best, right? We had consulted, we had written everything down, we considered the context we were operating in, the characteristics of the systems, and yet still that point came. Right? There was a point, we were migrating our CI server, all of this was built in Bamboo, separate team came along, they thought we were insane, right? We had so many jobs stitching it all together. So what can you do to defer or avoid the point of regret? One thing I'd recommend is to explore cognitive biases. This is not a small thing to consider. As you can see, there are many up there. This is an amazing visual. It's on Wikipedia. It talks about 6 decades of research and classifies all these different biases in there. And the thing is, these impact on decision making. So we like to think that technical decision making is a very logical process. Hopefully we've realised from Ross's talk before, it's a very human process. And a lot of your bias can filter in. So next time you're making a decision, maybe look up like one or two and then learn a little bit about it then. And over time, as you make more decisions, you'll learn more about this. And you might even like to include prompters into your templates. So we have templates for all our decision-making frameworks, and you can say, have you considered this? Are you aware of this type of bias? That sort of thing. Another very important thing to do is to actually build in a review point. So this is not news, like this is from 1967, but I think when it comes to decision making, we're usually pretty good at like identifying problems and definitely great at coming up with options, right? The more the better. We're okay-ish about making decisions, maybe not always being accountable for it. And I like to think as an organisation or as a community, we're pretty good with the action part, but it's the feedback that's really key. And I think that's where the ADR template that sort of talks about those consequences is really important. So what do you think is going to happen? And then what actually happened? And after a period of time, you can decide, was there something that you hadn't considered? Was there some new information? And then you might want to make another decision, or you might learn for next time. And some decisions, like they're not set and forget. If you choose a vendor in a particular space, things are moving so quickly, right? You want to look back after 2 years and say, what have the competitors been doing? Did it pan out as we thought? And even small decisions, after a month or two, definitely go back and look. And of course, remember that there are still all those biases out there. Personally, I think Annie Duke says it best. Experience can be an effective teacher. Clearly, only some students listen to their teacher. So my third recommendation on how to make no regrets architectural decisions, really try and consider that every decision is a learning opportunity. So really sounds a bit trite, but just do your best. In most cases, it's better to make some form of decision and move forward and learn something new rather than get stuck in analysis paralysis or defer it forever. Like, no decision is generally the worst decision. Make sure that you have time to look back and review, get feedback from other people as well, and then you can learn more for next time. So my 3 tips on how to make no regrets architectural decisions: know your context and your architectural characteristics. Make sure that the decisions that you make address those and that you explain why and write that down. Make sure that you've got an appropriate duration and formality for the decisions that you make, and then treat every decision as a learning opportunity. And just that simple mindset shift might really help. I think we're going to have a lot more resources come through the day as recommended reading material. Definitely recommend these books. So Thinking Fast and Slow talks a lot about the cognitive processes, those like really quick knee-jerk reactions we love to make, what happens, how we can get ourselves unstuck when we spend more time. Fundamentals of Software Architecture, amazing book. And then sort of two newer books. We'd love to come back next year and know enough to talk about residuality theory, which really speaks about how your architecture is kind of the outcome of all of these bad things that happen to it, and how you can build architectures that cater to those. And then How to Decide is a really useful book from Annie Duke. I'm reading it at the moment, and it's very practical. It's got all these exercises where you can go through and look back at past decisions and learn about the process and learn how to improve.